Welcome to Plastic Model Mojo, a podcast dedicated to scale modeling, as well as the news and events around the hobby. Let's join Mike and Kentucky Dave as they strive to be informative, entertaining, and help you keep your modeling mojo alive.
Dave, November is up and gone.
Yes, I know. Blink of an eye, man.
I tell you what, for the dark times, we're doing all right, but we'll talk about during the Bench Top halftime report. But other than that, man, what's up in your model sphere?
Well, the Thanksgiving has come and gone. It was great. I ate my fill and managed to get in some modeling related items. I got to purchase a few things, which we'll talk about. I got to do some reading, which I always find inspirational. I'm managing to keep my workflow flowing, although not at the rate maybe of the last time we discussed it. But all in all, I'm moving in a positive direction. My only question is, will the dark time close in, or will I manage to actually make some progress during the Thanksgiving to New Year's space? How about you?
Well, I got faith in you, man. I think you're going to do just fine.
I hope so. I'm glad one of us does. So how about you?
For me, I'm going to use this to address something. We've had several new listeners come along, and a few of them have been expressing some frustration with Patreon.
Yeah.
And over lunch today, I was taking a look at that. And at some point in October, they changed some things.
And didn't tell anybody, of course.
No, they probably did. I probably bend it with the rest of the Patreon.
Sure.
Emails.
Yeah.
My mistake. And I guess what was happening was if folks had made up their mind they wished to help support the show, they would go to our page that we were telling them to go to, and they're getting a join for free option and a $5 tier option, and that was it. Well, $5 means a lot, means different things to different people. And I'm sure that looked undesirable to a multitude of people, which is fine. So I dug into that, and actually I was talking to Scott Gentry because he helped me remember that. Yeah, I think they did change something. So I've gone and I've remedied that. So if folks go on there now, there's a couple of canned tiers for $1 and $5, and we're going to change the link we give you. I've already populated the blank show notes for this episode with the Patreon link. I'll mention that at the end during our normal shout out segment. But thanks for bringing that to my attention, the folks who did, and that should be fixed. And we'll go from there. I'm still playing with a couple of things on there I may change, but I see why they're a little frustrated.
Yeah.
So my model sphere has been trying to sort that out. I guess that's the big thing. That kind of eclipsed anything else I had going on.
Yeah. Well, and that gives everybody a little peek into the background that there's to put the podcast on. There's always something that we're doing, either doing show notes or having to order coasters or stickers or dealing with a software change or updating this or learning a new that. And, it takes a little bit of time. It takes a little bit out of our time, but I'll be honest with you, it's well worth it given all of the listener feedback that we get.
So that's my model sphere.
I would hope that, being that we're recording an episode, you've got a modeling fluid in hand.
I do. I'm polishing off that Jefferson's you sent me home with a couple of weeks ago, or a week ago.
Now, that was one of our kind listeners who brought that to us in San Marcos.
Yeah, it's Derek Post.
Okay, and so thank you again, Derek. I had that almost immediately on getting back from San Marcos, and only recently was able to transfer the half full bottle to Mike so that he could try out the rest of it. Well, you can tell us, give us your initial impression, but I remember that one.
Well, we'll save it till the end. It's good. And, he called it Patreon Plus when he handed us the bottle. So I thought that was funny.
Yes.
Thanks, Derek.
Yes.
What about you,
Thank
Dave?
you. Well, I have.
Oh, you got a beer. I'm surprised.
Yeah, I got a beer. I don't know if you've noticed, this is the year of the peach, where every brewer is coming out with a beer with peach in it. And this is Leinenkugel's Juicy Peach, a fairly light beer, 4.4% alcohol by volume. And it's very peach forward.
I bet.
Very, very peach forward.
I don't get into those too much, but curious to see how it goes at the end.
Yeah, peach is not my favorite flavor, but we'll see how it gets me through the episode.
Well, hopefully at least get you through listener mail.
Yep. Hopefully we got some.
We got some. We've always got some.
I know.
First up is from Mojovian Special Agent 003, Mr. Brandon Jacob.
Oh, what trail is he on now?
He's on the trail of making sure Winter Blitz is organized and goes off without a hitch again. So Winter Blitz is held on January 20th, 2024 at the Museum of the American GI in College Station, Texas. The website for all your information for that show is www.winter-blitz.com. And there you can check out all the highlights and categories and rules and all that stuff. And we'll have Brandon on probably in January when we get closer to this, maybe December, so he can tell us all about that again. And I think we helped move the needle for him a little bit last year.
Yep.
And this year they've got their major sponsor still, Lionheart Hobbies. And apparently they've managed to get Tamiya on board this time.
Oh, well, that's fantastic. You know, that show may be the first show of the calendar year in IPMS. I don't know if there's anybody.
It's unaffiliated.
Oh, that's right. You're right. It is unaffiliated, but it still may be the first model contest held in the calendar year of 2024.
All right. Well, I'll forward you this link so you can put it in the show notes.
You got it.
Up next is Scott Daniel from Cardiff, Wales in the UK.
All right.
One thing he wants to comment on is, I don't know how to pronounce this. It's one of these inexpensive airbrush and compressor sets. Oasser? Oasser?
Okay. I'm not familiar with that one, but there are a ton of those out there.
Yeah, and this has got him over the hump from brush painting models to his first foray into airbrushing, and we'll talk about that a little bit at the end of our special segment with Stephen. I think this one is kind of it's ahead of the point we make later, but it kind of agrees with the point we were making. Yeah. That folks will hear in a little bit. He thinks it's a great entry level approach.
Well, great. That's good news.
And he wants to know, what's your recommendation for a 1/72nd scale P38?
Well, my recommendation is that Tamiya should take their 48 scale P38, which is beautiful, and shrink it down. Other than that, the Academy kit, I guess, would be my 72nd scale recommendation at the current time, although everyone is hopeful that Tamiya will shrink down their 48 scale P38. Now, if you want to do an early P38, you're going to have to go RS. They made a P38 series and started with the very earliest P38. So if you're wanting to do an early P38 or an EF, you're going to have to go with RS models.
Which doesn't sound very attractive.
It's not Tamiya. Not again, not bashing anybody, but you're going to put more work in.
Right. It's probably not Academy either.
Yeah, well, right.
Well, I hope that helps him out. A little facetious with this one because this one did not come to us as listener mail, but it was from me.
Okay.
An inquiry I made, and I think it's going to shed a little light onto something. Paul M. Prizer, GmbH.
Okay.
I'd inquired about Prizer's 72nd scale military figures again.
Right.
Because these things are brutally difficult to find.
Yeah.
And he tells me that their assortment in 72nd scale will go back into production in the beginning of 2024.
Oh,
So
that's good news.
I think, this is one of those batch run kind of things like most model companies do.
Sure.
Not all the tools are in service at all times. So I think it would behoove folks to put some orders in from their preferred resellers. And what I guess folks can do, William K. Walters, the Model Railroad powerhouse out there, is one of their stockists. They sent me these. And then Stevens International, which is a wholesaler. So I don't know that individual hobbies is going to be able to order from Stevens, but your local hobby shop might be able to.
Oh, yeah. Your local hobby shop probably deals with Stevens, given it's one of the 2 or 3 big distributors. So if you go in and make a request at your LHS, they may be able to get them through by ordering them through Stevens.
And then Models 11 Incorporated, which I've never heard of. It's in San Antonio, Texas. I'm not sure if that's a wholesale or resale outlet. But I did get an answer.
Yeah. And listen, that's not only an answer, but a good answer.
We'll have to. The next step is to actually put an order in for these somewhere.
Yeah.
And see what happens. I wonder if Brian's, he's got to be a Walters and a Stevens.
Yes, he is both a Walters and a Stevens distributor.
And I know Walters used to manage back orders, so I don't know if Stevens does or not. They may be a fulfillment in hand and zero ship if they don't have it.
Right. Well, we'll have to talk to Brian about that.
All right. Interesting. Another show, Dave.
Okay.
Model Fiesta 42, hosted by IPMS Alamo Squadron, San Antonio again.
Yeah.
February 10, 2024 at the New Braunfels Civic and Convention Center, New Braunfels, Texas. This comes to us from Chris McLean, the scale model Padre.
Yeah. It's warm down there, so that's, your post-Christmas. It's just cold in most of the country. It's just one more excuse to go down to Texas, find a little bit of warmth and a model contest.
This year's theme is Under the Union Jack, all things British. That's an interesting one.
Oh, that's a good theme. I like that.
Yeah, it is. Pre-registration is now open, and the show details are available at modelfiesta.com. So thanks, Chris. Appreciate that, and looking forward to next time we see you, bud.
Yep, absolutely.
Jason Campbell, our good friend from Tennessee, was hoping we'd be at the Murfreesboro show, but we didn't make that one.
No, we did not.
Apparently, it was a good show. About 400 entries.
Nice.
That's pretty good for Murfreesboro, I think.
That is.
And about 6 of them from the Knoxville Gundam Club traveled down there as a group and stacked it up, sounds like.
I'm happy to see the Gundam modelers traveling to IPMS shows and bringing Gundams to raise awareness of those, so that basically you'll start getting dedicated Gundam categories in some of these local shows.
Well, he's even convinced one of their travel companions to buy their first armor kit. So,
oh, well, that's good.
There you go.
That's right. Nothing wrong with that either.
Jason, thanks for the update. Hey, we didn't make it, and we're going to get to a Tennessee show at some point. I guess he's saying that they're gearing up for the Chattanooga show in January. Now, I wish we had a little more information on that one because I don't. We'd have to look it up right now, but I'm not sure the date on that one.
Yeah, we got to find out because Chattanooga would be kind of cool.
Bob Bear, the voice of Bob from Charlotte, North Carolina. He wants to thank us for all the promotion we did for the Region 12 show back there in early November. They had a record number of models on the table and a great crowd all day long.
That's fantastic. There's nothing better to hear from all of these contests that are seeing record numbers of models on the table. We talk about the golden age of modeling, and that's not only is it an indication from all the kits and accessories and all of that stuff, but people are not only buying, but they're building and they're coming to contests, and all of those things make the hobby so much better.
And he's going to offer some insight into our question about what folks do for, just deciding their next builds. And he says he's always has a plan for his next few builds in his head. That's kind of like me.
Mm-hmm.
So they don't often go the way he has them configured in his mind, but at least he does think about it.
Yep.
And he's been working on the Proteus. He says for what seems like forever, but after 3 weeks of painting the outer hull, he's pleased with it, and he knows he's on the end game for that one. So that's when he starts going through his kits and aftermarket that he's accumulated for his next build. So,
well, that Proteus would go quicker if he wouldn't keep watching Fantastic Voyage and all the Raquel Welch scenes.
Well, it's probably sound advice.
Yeah, well, I understand. I feel his pain.
James Medley from the Land Down Under would like to communicate his little gripe.
All right.
I guess I've been saying Aussies, and he just says it's Aussies.
Aussies.
Like Ozzy Osbourne.
Gotcha.
All right. So make a note of that, Dave.
Aussies. Okay.
Here's an interesting one, Dave.
Okay.
From Thomas Karen, who's written in several times over the last several episodes. He wants to know if either of us have used a food dehydrator for speeding up paint drying.
I have not, but I'll tell you the one place that I encountered that was figure modelers.
Yep.
Particularly figure modelers who paint in oils, that they used food dehydrators quite often to speed up, because those tube oils, the oil painters or figure painters who paint in oils, those things can take days to dry. And that's the only place I've ever encountered it.
Well, I saw a video out on YouTube. Somebody had one, and it was an interesting one because the recommended model had all these removable trays in it.
Mm-hmm.
So you could really increase the volume of it by how much you took out.
Right.
And I'll have to find that again, because I was actually poking around thinking about getting one, because they're not that much. And just something else to have.
See, I model so slowly that I never have a problem with not letting my paint dry sufficiently.
Well, when I get into the weathering phase, I could see this as being helpful.
Yeah, especially if you're using tube oils to weather.
Really anything, I believe. If you can get the tube oils to dry quick, you can put other stuff on top of them, or you can really dry acrylics fast this way.
Yeah.
And he sent a couple of pictures from the state of Utah, where he's from, about their contribution to the war effort. One of them was a tank rebuilding facility. And the other one's apparently they built B-17s in Ogden.
Huh. I did not know that.
Or maybe they fitted them out for their final delivery.
Yeah, that may have been what they did, was that was a gathering point where they did final fit out and then distribution.
And a tasty modeling fluid from the great state of Utah. Saltfire Brewing Company in Salt Lake City. This beer is titled Big in Japan.
Big in Japan. That's
we're big in Japan, Dave.
That is a great name for a beer. And I hope everybody gets that joke.
And finally, Dave, from the email side of things, we have Mr. Michael Karnauka from New York City. Somehow
I knew Michael was going to email in. I bet he's got a great question.
His question is in regards to some modelers overthinking.
Guilty.
When he was learning about the hobby through reading the Verlinden guides, he saw they recommended using oil paints for flesh tones, and this intimidated him a whole bunch. And no matter how many times he tried it, he'd been better off using basic enamel flesh paints from Humbrol or Model Master or whatever at the time, and then adding a few highlights and shadows, rather than using the materials in the guides by Shep Paint or Verlinden. The result was too intimidating to have anything to do with figures, really. While instead of developing his own style and finding materials that work for him, he just kind of didn't do it because he's overthinking it, right?
Right.
So what do you think modelers have a tendency to overthink and stress about instead of finding a more practical or easier way that could work for them?
Okay. I'm going to go kind of sideways on this. I think, we talk about this as the golden age of modeling, and it is. I do think that because we have YouTube and so much really fantastic modeling content on YouTube, I think a lot of folks getting back into the hobby can see the stuff on YouTube and either experience the intimidation that Michael experienced and therefore never actually try what they're seeing, or they can have their expectations raised to levels that are beyond what they should be expecting to be fairly new into it, and therefore can build, have it not come out like they're seeing on YouTube and become frustrated and either let that become a stumbling block or quit. I think that for all the great that YouTube does for us and for all the great YouTube modelers out there, that there is a possible downside in seeing that stuff and trying to immediately hold yourself to that standard.
Yeah. I think our friend Ian McCauley up in Canada has witnessed some of these folks coming into the hobby center up there and
Yes,
buying armloads of stuff they've seen somebody do on YouTube and think they're going to knock it out first time. It's going to look just
first
like
time out of the park.
Yeah. So they may be intimidated after that. Yeah, you're right. Mm-hmm. For me, it's the next big task at hand, like on a more complicated build. Like I know I lamented the work I've done on the KV85 project that I'll talk about in the Benchtop halftime report, but I don't know, this overthinking. It's more over worrying because I a gaff there or a bad scratch put somewhere you don't want it kind of takes all the fun out of it, really. And then you're left with some repair work, or maybe got to get another kit and start over. And you could get down in a death spiral really quick doing some complicated conversion work if you're not careful. And I tend to put those dragons off sometimes.
Yeah.
As far as, his flesh thing, I get that one, but I've never really got the hang of oil paints. And part of it is when I started, I was impatient and young and there wasn't as much information. They tell you how to use it, the colors and the strategy of the shadows and highlights. But I'd always tend to overblend, and it all just turned to, it'd wash out to some
it'd turn muddy,
mid-tone, and then you have a big pile of paint on your figure. But I did start using like Humbrol and Model Master and testers and Pactra, all those enamels to do my figures when I was younger, and just found something that did work for me. So it's probably a good way to do it.
Yeah.
And ultimately a lot of it's, practice.
Yeah. And not only that, but the other thing is there's no, in so much of modeling, there's no one right way to do something. There are different people who have different techniques using different materials and different mediums, and some of them even come out with similar looking effects or results. So play around with it, so that don't be afraid to play around with it. And again, we can learn from our friend Steve here, who tells us that he spends as much time testing and practicing something as he does actually doing it on a model. And I really think that it's like how you get to Carnegie Hall. Practice, practice, practice.
Well, Dave, from the email side of things, that's it. I assume there's been some activity on Facebook.
There is. There has been activity. And I'd just like to single out a few of them. We're getting enough that pick and choose here some. The first one I'm going to mention is Jason Hanscom from New Hampshire. And Jason's DM was simply a DM where he reached out, told us that he enjoyed the show. He was listening. He found us. He's enjoying the show. He's a car modeler, but he's got an interest in doing some aircraft and armor. And we get a lot of emails and DMs that are nothing but simple thank yous for putting on the show. The reason I want to mention his is that it's one of those things that is an unexpected side benefit for me from doing this show that I never thought about when we started doing it. Because in the middle of a work day, I get a DM that thanks us for our efforts and tells us he's enjoying it. And that brightened my whole day. I got to admit it. It brightened my whole day, made me feel a little bit better. Made the efforts that you and I put in and the time that we take away from our modeling to do this, made it all the more worth it. So, Jason, thank you for reaching out, and thank you for letting us know you're out there listening. Next, our friend John McAvoy from out in Seattle. I've talked previously about the fact that I have 4 airbrushes currently in use, and 2 of them are Badgers. And he had heard that, and he wanted to know what the 2 Badgers I used were. And one of them's a Badger 150, and one of them's a Badger Velocity. It was just a matter of he'd heard me mention them. He was interested in them and wanted to know what I had and what I thought of them. So that led to a nice back and forth about what I use each one for. And it was really just an interesting little conversation. How many airbrushes do you have, Mike?
I have 2 in service and 1 retired.
2 in service and 1 retired. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Well, then we need to get you 2 more airbrushes.
No, I don't need 2 more. I've only got 2 hands. You got to have a lot of overlap there in the capability.
Yes, I do. But then again, in the middle of a project, you can switch brushes and keep going. And as opposed to stopping to clean something, it comes in handy from time to time. Victor Carlson sent us what I am convinced these aren't real, that they're a joke, but they're a really good joke. They were Lego sets for a bottle of Jameson's and a bottle of Maker's Mark.
I don't know.
And the boxes said, for ages 2 to or 4 to 6 or 4 to 8. And, I've got to think those are a joke, but they're really good. And if they're not a joke and they're out there, I'd like to find them because that would be funny as heck to do. Dave Weiss reached out with a really interesting question. Okay, as you know, model masks for canopies are the way to go. As we know from our last guest, from our previous episode, they're available. They're becoming even more available, and they are such a time saver that I won't build a model without one. Well, Dave has a 48 scale Revell B17 for which there isn't a current mask set. And there is, however, a mask set for a Montex mask set for HK Models 48 scale B17. And he was wondering if they would work. Now, I don't know because I don't have either kit, but that is certainly a possibility. If there is a mask set for the same model from another manufacturer, that's a good place to start. But you do have to be aware that there are variations between kits, even of the same prototype by 2 different model manufacturers. So there's bound to be some variation, and you just have to be prepared for that and trim and add accordingly. But it sure as heck is better than starting from scratch with just nothing but kabuki tape, thin strips of kabuki tape and liquid masker. So yeah, if I'm doing a project and there's no masks for it, but there's masks for the same aircraft from another model manufacturer, I'd sure as heck get those masks and take a shot at it and see how closely they lined up.
Yeah, it's probably worth a shot. But I tell you, man, there's a line to cross that if you're having to adjust multiple edges of every every mask, you might as well just start from zero.
Yes, absolutely. And you could encounter one where it's more trouble than it's worth. But I think it's least worth taking a look at and trying. Usually mask sets are so inexpensive. If you're taking a flyer on it and it doesn't work out, it's not that big a deal.
Nope. Got any more?
Yeah. Speaking of Kevin Hedrich, our guest from the last episode, he said that my praise of the Tamiya 72nd Scale Zero inspired him to go out and get the kit. And he thinks that Tamiya should be paying me a commission because I'm doing such a good job selling this kit to the general public. And I completely agree. So, Mr. Tamiya-san, if you're out there, I'll look for a commission check in the mail.
Maybe they'll put your picture on the box.
There you go.
Like Wheaties.
That's right. Finally, our friend from Southern Kentucky, Warren Dickinson, reached out to me. He was listening through back episodes, and I said something the exact opposite of what I meant to say. We were talking about wingtip lights. And I talked about and said Japanese aircraft generally had clear covers with colored bulbs. And that's the exact opposite of what's true. They used colored covers with clear bulbs. So he brought that to my attention. He caught it and gave me the chance here to correct that. So
well, that's good to hear.
Thank you for catching that, Warren.
That's good to hear because after you said that, I was trying to figure out how I was going to be satisfied with my E16 wing lights.
Yeah.
And not cut the notches out of the tips of the wings and go back and do something different.
Now you can cut. Now you can color, but just keep in mind that the Japanese didn't use red and green; they used red and blue.
Okay, well, that's good to know as well.
Yep.
I think the instructions might take care of that.
Yes, I think they'd probably tell you that. Well, that's it from the DM side.
Well, folks, if you want to write into the show and communicate with us and ask a question or offer a complaint or some praise or whatever you'd like to do, we're glad to hear from you. All I ask is that you include your city and state or your country and city there so we can kind of get a feel for where folks are coming from to us. And you can do that by going to, or you can email us at plasticmodelmojo@gmail.com, or you can send us a Facebook message through the Facebook Messenger system, and I'll usually take care of the emails, and Dave takes care of the messages, and we talk about it here. So, folks, drop us a note. We'd like to hear from you.
Absolutely. You make my day. When you're done listening to this episode, if you would please do us a favor, go to whatever podcasting app that you listen to us on. Please rate the podcast. Please give it 5 stars. It helps us become more visible. If you would recommend our podcast to somebody who you know is a modeler who's not currently listening, if you help them figure out how to listen to a podcast, help them to subscribe to our podcast, it helps us grow the podcast. We continue to grow, and it is the listeners who are helping do that. So please continue to do that.
After you've done that, please check out the other podcasts out in the model sphere. And you can do that by going to www.modelpodcast.com. That's modelpodcastsplural.com. It's a consortium website set up with the help of Stuart Clark from the Scale Model Podcast up in Canada. There we've aggregated all the banner links to the podcasts who are participating in this mutual cross-promotion of our shows. And it's been a good thing. So please check out the podcast there. Lots of content. Chris Meddings was talking about how many hours a month it was, and it was getting substantial.
Yes.
So you should be able to do lots of listening while you're driving and modeling at this point.
Yep.
We've also got a lot of blog and YouTube friends out there. Mr. Jim Bates, a Scale Canadian TV with his YouTube channel. Chris Wallace, model airplane maker up in Ottawa. He's got a nice blog and a YouTube channel as well if you like model airplanes. you want to check him out. Jeff Groves, the Inch High Guy, all things 72nd scale. You can check out Jeff's 72nd scale blog, the Inch High Guy. Evan McCallum, Panzermeister 36, good friend of the show. I think he's got something cooking here pretty soon.
Yes, he does.
We talked to him the other night. And finally, our guest tonight, Stephen Lee, Sprue Pie with Frets, a great long and short form blog. And we're going to have a nice little conversation about the current wealth of 3D printing products, files, models, all that stuff, and what it kind of means to the consumer right now. So stick around. You can hear that one.
If you are not a member of your national IPMS organization, IPMS USA, IPMS Canada, whatever IPMS, whatever country you're in, if you're not a member of the national organization, please consider joining. The different national organizations provide a framework for the local chapters and for the local chapters to put on shows and also interact between the different IPMS national organizations. It's a bunch of guys volunteering their time to try and give you a better modeling experience. In addition, if you're an armor modeler, the Armor Modeler Preservation Society, AMPS, is out there, and they produce a very nice magazine, Boresight, and they have a national contest coming up in April in South Bend, Indiana. So please consider joining AMPS as well.
Well, Dave, our sponsor ad's coming up, but I want to mention one thing from
Okay.
Dr. Miller. His airbrush coaching service is launched, and he mentioned that during his last appearance on the show.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll provide the link in the show notes. Did we get that up in the dojo?
I don't know if we did. We'll do that as well.
Plastic Model Mojo is now brought to you by Model Paint Solutions, your source for Harder Steenbeck airbrushes, David Union power tools, and laboratory-grade mixing, measuring, and storage tools for use with all your model paints, be they acrylic, enamels, or lacquers. Check them out at www.modelpaintsolutions.com.
Well, Dave, All-American Red, White, and Blue.
Yep, Madison coming up.
Yep. At the time of this recording, Dave, it's 231 days until the IPMS National Convention for 2024 in Madison, Wisconsin is on the doorstep.
Time is flying.
Well, folks are going to want to go to nats2024.com, and on there you're going to find a link for a PDF, the Madison Mission Brief. In that multi-page document is going to be their full spread on what's going to be going on at the show with important dates that are coming up. And I was pretty impressed with all the information in that PDF. It's like 24 pages long, I think.
They are putting the effort into it. There is no question that Jeff Hearn and the guys up in Madison have dedicated themselves to trying to take the Nationals to the next level. And in doing so, they are putting next level effort into it. I, for one, just like you, I'm impressed by it.
Well, one thing I want to see how you're impressed by is I want you to get on there at some point. And you can tell me tomorrow during one of our text exchanges. Look at the number of seminars that are being offered at this thing.
Okay.
And give me your opinion.
All right.
It's off the hook. It's a lot.
Yeah.
I'm be curious how they're going to manage it.
And that is going to be a real challenge. But I have said for any number of years now that the seminars are some of the best stuff at the Nationals. And the fact that these guys have taken that to heart and dedicated themselves to really going hog wild and pig crazy in regard to that is nothing but positive to me.
A couple of important dates. The first one is the hotel bookings open January 6th at noon Central Time.
Yes. That's 1:00 Eastern.
That's right. And pre-registration opens on February 3rd. So might want to jot those down, folks, or keep abreast of the things going on at nats2024.com. Set yourself a reminder and keep those dates in mind. Well, Dave, our special segment tonight is dealing with 3D prints, kind of a different take on it. A lot of the shows out there in the model sphere have talked about the technical side of 3D printing, a couple of perspectives, maybe even more than two. We got Stephen Lee tonight from Sprue Pie with Frets blog, and we're going to talk about the kind of the wealth of the 3D printing offerings out there in the marketplace now, kind of from the consumer modeler side, how we're kind of dealing with that, taking it all in, what we're using, what we're not.
Drinking from a fire hose.
Drinking from a fire hose, the good, bad, and the ugly. So let's get into that, Dave.
You got it.
Dave, tonight we're welcoming back a longtime listener and friend of this show, Mr. Steve Lee, author of the blog Sprue Pie with Frets. Steve, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing swell. How are we all doing?
All right. Now, do we have to call you Sprue Pie or Mr. Frets?
That's Mr. Frets to you.
Mr. Frets to me. Okay.
No, just call me Steve, please. Because when you call me Steven, it makes me feel like I'm in trouble.
Gotcha.
Okay, I'll remember that. Well, let's start with the blog. How's that been going for you of late? You seem to be making posts dang near daily.
Well, sure. I've kind of switched it up over the last year to where it's almost exclusively progress on stuff that I'm working on with an occasional commentary. And there's a couple reasons why that switch was necessitated. One was has been my workload, my real life, money making workload has completely changed in the past 2 years. I used to be a singleton at my nonprofit, my aerospace nonprofit where I work. Now I have a whole staff and we've got all kinds of interesting stuff going on, and I've been promoted a couple of times. So that has kind of bit into my a lot of my discretionary time. But another thing happened, which was I had the awful COVID. And I didn't realize it really in the moment that it was happening. And I don't want to say that I have long COVID, but I was barely keeping up with work and with other, family responsibilities and so forth, because that mental fog thing really didn't lift until maybe the last 2 or 3 months. And I feel great now. And and if you ask me in the middle of it, like, how do you feel? You'd say, I feel harried, but I feel great. But I realized that was a pretty significant thing. And it was actually really not just hard to find the time to do a long post. I just had a really hard time with the thinking.
When did it hit you? When did you get the COVID that then bit into you and lasted?
August of 2022.
Oh, okay. So you were late to the party.
Yes, indeed. I came back from a big trade show in Las Vegas and got sick as a dog, and was under the weather with the really strong, measurable symptoms of, fever and coughing and all that stuff for probably 10 days or so. And then came out of it, went back to work. But it's really, like I said, it's been in the last 2 or 3 months that I realized, wow, like I can think again. I can write again.
Was there some triggering event that made you realize, hey, this is, that I've been suffering effects that I didn't realize I was suffering?
It was kind of a slow realization, or a slow-ish realization. And it actually had to do with writing long blog posts and doing some things at work that suddenly became very easy. Like they were things I used to be able to do, writing talking points or something like that for our executive director or something that I used to just be able to do it half awake. And now, no. And I realized, when all of a sudden it's like, wow, I banged that out really quick. That was easy to do. And then, actually, writing longer and more, sort of analytic and commentary types of blog posts, I realized, I didn't do one for a long time. And when I finally had the motivation and the capacity to do it, I realized, wow, I haven't done this for a while. And here I am doing one, and it feels good to kind of flex the muscles and get out there and write something again.
Well, we're happy to have you back at 100%.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
Folks can check out your long and short form blogs at Sprue Pie with Frets. What's the full URL there? Where can folks find that?
That would be, I think it's wordpress.spruepiewithfrets.com.
Yeah.
And I know if you just search for Sprue Pie with frets in Google, you'll
Yes.
find it really quick.
Yeah, it's not like another. If you put Sprue Pie with frets in Google, it's not like a lot of other websites are going to come up.
Well, what I find is I go into my browser and I want to go to Sprue Brothers, and I find myself looking at my blog, and because I didn't go all the way through the process there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully the opposite of that happens for you too.
Yeah.
That I get some traffic off of that.
Yeah.
Well, let's hope.
Yeah. You need to talk to them about putting a banner link on your blog and selling for them.
Yeah.
Well, Steve, we've been talking back and forth for quite some time. You and I both have been at various levels exploring this proliferation of 3D printed material, kits, parts, files, whatever you got. And I think this thing really took off on the hobby side. It's probably rather concurrent with when we kicked this podcast off, about 2020. Now there's probably some stuff before that, but it just seems like in the last 2 to 3 years, this thing just keeps going up this exponential rise in volume and scope of genre and all that.
Right. It sure does. My own history with it as a hobby medium goes back even further. I've never owned a 3D printer. I want to underscore that. And I certainly don't know how to do, Blender or, CAD or any of that stuff. I've only ever really been interested in the stuff that you can get from it. And as we've mentioned here before, and it's apparent on my blog, I'm also a model railroader. I haven't done much of it lately, for maybe the last 3-4 years, but I still keep a hand in it. But the last layout I built, I used a lot of 3D printed stuff. And this was before our current generation of, and I can't remember it. This was all filament printed stuff. It was not necessarily the current modern DLP type of printing. It was a lot cruder stuff. And the things I saw other model railroaders use it for is things that where fine detail really didn't matter much, like something like a tunnel portal or a bridge abutment, basically a scaled down piece of concrete. And people would print 3D printed things off of that. And then they started getting a little more complicated. And you started seeing things like the stuff I used. I used a lot of 3D printed utility poles, because the thing I was modeling was electric railroads, not electric train, like all the model trains run off of, but the trains that run off of wire over the tracks.
Yes.
And every railroad that had those had a very distinctive set of poles or catenary bridges. They're called, that wire is called catenary. And I started getting those printed, and they were beautiful. They were just gorgeous. They were also had a couple other weird qualities to them. Was their tendency to warp was always really bad because there's like really thin cross sections on parts like that, and the texture was a little weird because it was the filament printing rather than rather than our modern DLP stuff. And then the other thing was the material, I believe, is in the deposition, and I was getting all full disclosure, I was getting it off of Shapeways, and it's actually a vinyl or a nylon material. It's not a styrene or a resin or something like that. So that meant that prepping it for paint, and it came out of whatever their process was with some kind of waxy residue on it. So you had to do a whole thing where you stripped off that waxy residue so paint would even stick to it. And then you had to, in my experience, you had to always use something with a strong solvent. So I was priming them with like Rust-Oleum, like right out of a rattle can. But it was, soaking them in Bestine, which is, I believe, hexane, which is, in all the toxic chemicals we expose ourselves to in our model building hobbies. It's a doozy. That's also rubber cement solvent. It's actually used, a lot of print shops will have it because, like a like all of, all the modern modeling books that we have that square binding. That's called a perfect binding. And they use, that's like a fillet of rubber cement in there. And to clean those up, they use heptane, to kind of like wipe off the excess goober gobs of stuff. But that was what removed it. So it was a tremendous pain in the rear end.
So now this was back in what, 2018,
15, 16.
Oh, that far back.
Indeed. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, the filament printers have been around quite a while.
Would you say at that time you were doing it for your model railroading, that basically the 3D printing had an entry into model railroading maybe a little bit earlier than it did into scale plastic modeling?
Yes.
Okay.
And I think there's two factors to that. One is I just don't think the stuff was fine enough, like had the fidelity and had the print quality that we have today that we already take for granted. It did not have that. And I think the other factor there, and I'm going to knock model railroading a little bit here, I think the tolerances there can be kind of low.
Yeah.
In terms of like how much detail they really want. And I think there's a couple of conceits in there too. Like model trains have to take some abuse. Like they will derail, they will fall off the tracks. And anything you attach to a train model, this isn't 100% true 100% of the time, but it's got to stay on. There are no lift rings, that are going to get, knocked off every time, or an antenna that gets knocked off every time. You really strive to strike a balance on a railroad model between scale fidelity and scale size and cross section and durability. But I think in some ways model railroaders have a little, they have a higher tolerance for things that are out of scale or simplified detail and that sort of thing. Again, not 100% true 100% of the time, but I think that's one of the reasons why it caught on with some model railroaders. And then of course you have opportunities to do things like a tunnel portal. It's basically a large cement object. How detailed does it really need to be?
Then the layer lines on a filament deposition printer kind of starts to look like the wooden forms used to make some of those tunnel portals and bridge abutments anyway. So
so
they could leverage that a little bit. So that, yeah, I can understand how the lower fidelity detail would lend itself to those kind of applications before some other scale modeling where you might look at it and go, yeah, but if it would only do this,
right,
then you'd have something, right?
Right. But I think about 2018 or 2019, I saw my first like printed at home DLP piece or part. And it was a guy in one of the clubs that I belong to in Washington, DC. He showed me a 1/72nd, of the many, many varieties of bogies that adorned the bottom half of Sherman tanks. There was some type of bogie he needed that had never been really made or had never been made in sufficient quantity or cheaply enough. And he had designed it and made it and printed it. And he showed it to me, and it was printed in some kind of like clear green resin. It was going to look great once it got a coat of paint on it. But I remember seeing it and thinking, holy smokes, like this is actually real, because not only did he print something that was kind of model worthy, for crying out loud, it was in 1/72nd. It was, so how big is a Sherman bogey in 1/72nd? Maybe, 5/16 of an inch, just over a quarter or something like that. It was pretty remarkable looking. And that's when I thought, wow, this is coming for us. Like we're going to start having this stuff on our models very soon.
You say you're a consumer of kind of the pre-printed stuff mostly, if not entirely. I'm coming at this from just about every angle possible. I've bought parts pre-printed. I bought files to print on my own printer, and I've done a fair amount of design at this point as well. Now, not a lot. I'm not one of these guys who's going gung ho, and because I tell you, you can get yourself into a second hobby real quick if you're going to get into 3D modeling, and that's just was not where I was looking to go just yet. I'm not saying it's never going to happen, but I think touching at it from all three angles, I guess one thing that's you kind of get an awareness, I guess, and just the sheer volume of stuff out there, and it just grows. I don't know if you follow Scalemates.
Yes.
It just every day. I literally, I think probably every day, and I would not be wrong too many times. There's something new out there that's sometimes you can't tell by the Scalemates posting, but it looks like it's probably a 3D printed item just because there's so much of it.
Well, and what I find interesting about that is that there are some 3D printed kits a la Vargas or whoever, but the vast majority of the 3D printed stuff you see on Scalemates is accessories, cockpit interiors, wheel well interiors, 55-gallon drums, hand carts, whatever. But the vast majority of it seems to be focused on the accessory / improvement rather than the replacement of plastic kits.
Well, I think I've seen the same thing. I've seen some permutations of that. One is again, this is not a specifically a scale modeling thing, but it was a model railroading thing. I know that 3D printed stuff gets used to make masters of stuff. And I would certainly be curious to see how much stuff that is molded in resin, and even these different like landing gear sets that are molded in or not molded in, but they're either lost wax brass or there's some kind of like pewter or white metal. I'd be very curious to see if those masters were produced in some kind of a 3D printing environment, because the opportunity for, getting it perfectly straight and square and getting the cross sections right. I mean, the opportunity seems like too good to pass up. Like, why would you scratch build this, this landing gear strut with a bunch of, doodads and gewgaws sticking out of it, braces and oleo cylinders and all that stuff. Like, that all seems like it would be easy to design in one or the other of the 3D of the design programs. And then you print a master. And I think, Mike, you're really familiar with this. You can print that master in something other than the plastic we use. I believe wax or some other meltable substance can be used, which can take you right to brass casting, which is, the lost wax method, which is you carve the master out of wax, pour a plaster mold all the way around it, melt the wax out, pour some liquefied, very hot molten brass or whatever pewter into it, and boom, you've got a really big, fat, sturdy, heavy, very well detailed casting. And it seems like 3D printing would be a shortcut to either that kind of mastering or the shortcut to the traditional resin process of, we're going to pour latex all around a 1/72 tank hull or some such thing.
Well, I know Formlabs does have two resins that are made for lost wax jewelry making. So that's certainly a possibility. But to be honest, though, I think some of these consumer level printers have gotten so inexpensive.
Yes.
That I think we've gone through a phase. Now, if you're making metal parts, maybe it would still hold what we've just discussed, the lost wax method of casting those and using 3D print as a high detail master. So set that aside a minute. If you're talking about a tank cupola or aircraft radome or something like that, just some detail part, I think we've probably already gone through the phase where folks were buying somewhat expensive consumer 3D printers and printing masters and doing the silicone rubber molds and the polyurethane resin castings from that, to where now the printers are so cheap,
right,
that they've got a stable of printers and they're just cranking this stuff out, and the 3D print is what's being sold, which I think is what we've both been experiencing. And I know our friend Evan McCallum over at Panzermeister 36 on YouTube is gone through a whole bunch of 3D printed track sets for 35th scale armor vehicles. And it's just, the volume of stuff out there is just insane. It's so hard to keep up, and there's so much duplication. I just wonder, so the delivery, whether you're buying finished parts, detail accessories like Dave mentioned that I think we've all used. Let's talk about that a minute. What are some of the things you've been using?
Wheels. Wheels
for what? 72nd scale?
Yeah.
Military vehicles, airplanes? What are you doing?
1/72nd scale military vehicles. So molding tires everybody complains about them. Like they complain when they're when they get the vinyl or whatever soft rubbery plastic things that come in, like most trumpeter kits and stuff like that.
Yep.
And there's a reason they're doing that. The reason they're doing that is the to get that tread and at least some modicum of sidewall detail, you need to mold it out of something flexible, because you would never get the rigid styrene part out of the mold. It wouldn't, it wouldn't work. So they keep going back to those rubber tires, and they have the added bonus of being, if you squint really hard, it's the color of a rubber tire. so it has that quality and stuff to it. So this is the thing where I think 3D printing really shines, is you can mold, or you can manufacture things that could never be made in a two or multi-part mold. Like you couldn't even slide mold it in styrene. And tire tread and all of the complex detail on a modern large wheel sidewall, you'd never really be able to pull that off. I mean, there are a couple of manufacturers who've done some various tricks to pull that off with styrene. It's pretty unusual and weird. Aoshima in 1/72nd has done some pretty miraculous things with like a fully rendered styrene molded tire, but that's the exception, and it's certainly not the rule. And the thing that has been a miraculous piece or part for me is wheels and tires for 1/72nd things, and then treads. And when you just said something, poor Evan McCallum cementing together or whatever it is you do with, a whole bucket of 1/35th track links to kind of get them to behave and form into something that looks like the tracks around a tank. In 1/72nd, one of the things you can do convincingly, and it looks fine, it looks great, is to actually do that whole, and this is going to horrify some people, but it looks great, is you can do the whole block of road wheels, sprockets, idlers, and the tracks in one shot. And it looks fantastic, and it makes for some lovely model building, because that whole tedious step, you just bypassed it. You just, what you have is a challenge of painting, convincing tracks, road wheel rubber, and the painted wheels of the road wheels and the sprockets and all of that kind of stuff. But those are awesome. And I am, the world's biggest fan of that. But I do want to back up to something that to this idea that it's mostly replacement parts or some kind of like aftermarket detail parts. In 1/72nd, there are a lot of whole kits.
Yes, more and more.
And I built a red tank miniature MTLB, and an MTLB is kind of like the moral equivalent of a 113 in the in the Russian. It's just a plain old APC with one crew served weapon on top of it. It's like a 12.7 millimeter machine gun, and it's shaped a lot different than a 113. It's longer, but it's just an armored box, to carry troops around, and they usually tow a howitzer with it, and then they use it as the basis for a lot of like radar and air defense vehicles and all that kind of stuff. But I built one of those, and that was a whole kit, and it was an astonishingly low number of parts. The mind-blowing thing was the headlight guards were molded or manufactured right into the hull. They were not, and the headlights, and they were all fully formed. They didn't have any compromises or anything like that. They were those headlight guards were a scale cross section, and the headlights looked great to the point where it was really hard to paint them because they're behind these guards. But it built into a very gratifying and a really good looking model. But it was only, I'm looking at a picture of it right now, and I think it was 8 parts, 10 parts, something like that. 1, 2, 3, 4. 5. Yeah. I don't think it was 10 parts. And that, that opens up the Pandora's box of like, are these easier to build? And I will say, no, they're absolutely not easier to build, because they tend not to have like really nice locating pins and things like that on them. So getting some of the basic things like making sure that machine gun is straight in its little cupola that it belongs in, and getting the tracks straight and square, very tricky. That was some next level modeling. I mean, it's not a brag or anything like that, but I was like getting out 1, 2, 3 blocks and doing all kinds of crazy stuff to make this thing square and, sit on the ground straight and stuff, because it was these beautifully molded components that just butt joined together, and you had to kind of guess, how they went together. But it turned into a beautiful model. Like I can't say enough good things about this thing. It was one of the most gratifying builds I've done lately, but it was not a shortcut. It was not easy at all. And that leads me to another thing that was tricky about dealing with these materials. And I think that this is a little bit underappreciated, is that they absolutely, in my experience, don't behave anything like resin or styrene. The example I will give here with that MTLB and a couple of other things that have kind of crossed my workbench over recently is doing any kind of drilling into it, where styrene, you can take your pin vise at a number 72 bit or something like that, and you can twist it, and these nice, neat little curls of styrene will come right off of the flutes of that drill bit. And what I found the 3D printed materials do, it's like granular. It's like it's compacted particles of plastic, and that, for all I know, that's literally what it is. But it doesn't form those little curls. It just kind of crumbles, and it behaves in some kind of untoward ways that to drill something like an antenna base out or something like that is actually incredibly tricky, and takes some real steady hand and some other trickery to get that right. So
do you find it harder, quote unquote, harder, the material harder than, say, styrene or resin?
I think it's about the same as resin.
Okay.
It's hard, but it's also, it doesn't form this, that resin, when you sand it, we all know you're supposed to wear a respirator and all that stuff when you start really sanding on resin, and it's got that delightful smell and all that.
Sure.
This stuff doesn't.
Sure, Mr. OSHA.
Yeah. Yeah. Not that you see the respirator go on the last time I sanded any resin, or maybe any time I've ever sanded resin, but it does have it, and it forms like a super fine powder,
right?
When you sand resin, like a dust, like a lunar fine, the moon has dust on it that's like smaller than dust. And I think that's what resin does. This stuff just kind of crumbles. It just forms. The only thing I could describe it as is crumbs. Sometimes when you drill into it and stuff. So, I mean, it holds all this great detail with these, like these headlights and headlight guards that I just described. But dealing with the grinding and drilling it's not impossible. You just gotta, just like when you go from Airfix plastic to Tamiya plastic, you gotta recalibrate a little bit. Like it's just gonna behave a little differently.
Gotcha.
Dave, you bought any parts? Details?
Well, actually, and this was something that I was going to mention to Steve. One of my favorite resin manufacturers, Barracuda Cows, who does, speaking of wheels, some of the most beautiful aircraft wheels in 72nd, 48, 32nd. And they've always worked in resin. And I've noted that within the last 3 to 6 months, all of a sudden, they are now producing items where they're not using 3D Masters, what they're actually selling you is the 3D printed part. And
Right.
if Roy is the owner of Barracuda Cows, if Roy is making that move, that tells me this is where the future is headed. I'm not unconvinced that we will see the near disappear, that resin, compared to 3D parts, resin will be what resin was to vacuforms, that it's the next technology replacing the last technology.
Well, we can get to more on that in the wrap up.
Sure.
For me, I've bought parts for sure, and then I want to get some comments about general quality spectrum here in a minute. But I've bought tool clamps and tracks and all that kind of stuff for armor models. I don't think I've got any aircraft 3D printed stuff yet. It's probably imminent, though, that eventually I'll pick up something just because of the way things are going. I've also bought a full kit. I've got one of the Vargas 35th scale Matilda ones I picked up at the IPMS National Convention. Christian Gurney just built that from Bases by Bill.
Yes, he did.
And posted it to the Plastic Model Dojo Facebook group. That's the kit I've got. And your comments about sanding and drilling and stuff kind of resonate with me on that, because I've noticed since I've bought the thing that there's a front plate on that tank that mounts the front idler wheels, and one of them's taken a warp to it that's going to throw all that out of alignment. And I got a feeling this isn't going to be like polyurethane where you can just heat it up and bend it back where you want it. I think this is going to prove to be a real challenge.
Yeah. Well, my one experience with heating up a bent, and this, albeit this is a very small piece. There was one of the cruiser weapon barrel on that MTLB. It was warped. It had a nice hockey stick curve in it, and I busted out my my little heat gun, and I made this fancy little jig out of a couple of blocks of wood and a couple of T-pins, and got it. It would flex and it would be fine. And I shined the heat source on it, very carefully, just kind of nuzzled up to it, and I saw it like snap to straightness, and I thought, that's awesome. And then in the process of like pulling it out of the little block and pins that I made to set that up, it broke. So it became extremely brittle, and something came out of the spares box to replace that. And that was, as I heard somebody say recently, not about not making mistakes, it's how you recover from them. And so, yeah, I recovered from that little goof. But my lesson there is, I think your instincts, I believe, are spot on, Mike. It will behave differently than how resin or styrene behaves.
Well, another thing I want to talk about a little bit is I've also bought one set of files, print yourself kind of thing. Mm-hmm. There's a designer named Faustus over on Cults 3D. Cults3D.com is a file exchange and file sharing and selling kind of a marketplace. And Faustus marketed this. It's a full kit. It's a Flak Panzer 38D, which is when the Germans took the 38 Czech design and made their own changes to it, modernized it, and there were these paper Panzers that were intended to be built off this Germanized platform of the 38T. And I bought this kind of out of as a curiosity, and I've got it mostly printed now. I haven't built it yet, but I've been working my way through all the parts. It was really interesting because it's got a full PDF of instructions. It's got a color, what would be equivalent to a box art. And it's got some color profiles as well, and full instructions. So it's kind of the first time I'd ever seen one, a DIY print file set done to this level of I guess, completeness or professionalism. Now that file set me back $50. So that's a lot. in my opinion. That'd be
Because
my opinion.
you still have to pay for the material.
Yeah, still got to pay
to
for the
actually
resin
make
to
it.
print it,
Right.
which is going to be not insignificant, but not a lot, but not insignificant. Now, I just noticed that there's a company called Land Ships Modeling, and I saw this come up on ScaleMates it's probably been a month ago now. It's a Japanese Hago light tank,
Mm-hmm.
a 3D print file set for that in 35th scale. I don't know the completeness of all the instructions and all that, but it's literally an order of magnitude cheaper. It's $5.
Huh.
Now
Wow.
the difference, a couple of differences that come up real quick is the Faustus set is a vehicle that's I don't think's ever been done before. I know who is Amusing Hobbies has got one rendition of the 38D chassis, some sort of vehicle based on it, but it's not this one. By contrast, the Hago by Landship Modeling, that's also been kitted by Dragon, and it's been kitted multiple times by Fine Molds, and all those
Right.
kits are out there to be bought. Now they're not $5, but you still got to print this as well. But what struck me as odd was it just seemed like for that kind of market, folks are still trying to figure out where to go with it. I think it's that to me, that's indicative of an unknown market space to have an order of magnitude difference in price for what's essentially the same thing.
Right. And I find it interesting that, that somebody's selling the file is asking so much for it. The thing that's because it's kind of like selling somebody the, sheet music or the blueprints to something. It's like, well, that's great, but you still are going to have to, if it's a blueprint for a porch or a deck, you're still going to have to, apply, it's important. It's an important element, the design and so forth, but that's like only about 5% of the actual work. You still gotta cut wood and drill things and, learn to play the piano or whatever, you want to however you want to torture the metaphor there.
Well,
And it seems high.
Do you think that maybe that's an indication of a market in flux where, because this is new technology, especially new technology in the modeling space, that we have a market that the water hasn't found its level yet? So you have somebody selling a file for $50, somebody else selling another for $5, and it's just a matter that over the next 1 year, 2 years, however long the market's going to be in flux, that it's the invisible hand working its magic to determine what the right number is?
I don't know. The $50. I know I paid the $50. I think John Bonani bought it as well, and somebody's been helping him print those files. But the deck analogy is an okay one, but I think for this, the 3D modeling is probably a larger percentage of the finished product than you might realize.
Yeah, and having not done it, I don't want to like get in there and make some kind of pronouncement like, the design is nothing, I totally think that there's something to that, but you're still, and that designer might be kind of making some kind of calculation, like I'm going to, what's the person who spends $50 on this is actually going to buy it and print it for him and half a dozen of his friends. So it's almost like I'm selling it to 6 people or something. And they might just be making some kind of, for lack of a better word, some kind of a risk calculation.
They probably are. And then the fact that the Landships model, the Hago, has been kitted already, you have to wonder why that one was even selected to begin with.
Right.
Maybe that's in there.
Is it more accurate?
To be determined. I'm given that I've got one in plastic, that one has zero interest for me, so I won't be getting that one. But I tell you, at $50 a file set for complete vehicle, I don't know. I think that's going to get pretty rich pretty quick. I bought this one kind of for the novelty of it, because the first one I'd seen to this level of professionalism, so I wanted to see what it was about. And my intent is to print it all up and try to build it up this year or this coming year, and see how that goes. Because I think you made an interesting point in that there weren't a lot of alignment features on the 72nd scale MTLB you're working on, and I think that's going to get into the quality side of this. And before I get there, I'll make one more point about Faustus. Something else I've seen him doing over on Cults 3D is apparently he was getting pirated. So to be expected, given the transfer of electronic media, right?
Right.
That's just going to happen. He's now offering these STLs, or at least a subset of some of his things. I think his where did I see it? I think I saw it on Armorama. There were 12 items that looked like he had grouped together, and I have not investigated it yet, but he's offering a commercial license for traders for those items, which I have to assume means that you can buy those files from him at some predetermined price, and you're free to print and sell the product after that.
Right.
So that's another kind of interesting take on things.
Well, and kind of a weird sideways twist on that is that you've got any number of YouTube modelers, people with YouTube channels related to modeling, many of which are supported by Patreons. And of course, Night Shift comes to mind, but there are others where, they're making some of their own 3D accessories and then making those files available for download to their Patreons. It's kind of a sideways twist on marketing a commercial license to it, where they're using it almost as an add-on.
Well, something that we haven't talked about that exists, that is out there, is I have kits from, I haven't built them, but they're in the stash. I have kits from Vespid, from 4, and from Galaxy that all have 3D printed parts in them.
Yes. I was going to say, within the last year, I have bought models that actually contain 3D printed parts, and these are from mainstream manufacturers.
Yes. Yeah. The Vespid, and again, what they have focused on are the things that you can't really do with injection molding. And in Vespid's case, the dreaded cloth mantlet of that Australian Royal Australian Armored Corps Centurion from Vietnam, that right. Dreaded canvas mantlet they molded in or manufactured in 3D print. It's a little nice little pink piece, but it's got the nice wrinkles and all that kind of stuff, which I have to say as an aside, I can see somebody making a Sherman bogey or a road wheel, which is really just a complex, not a kind of an arrangement or a complex bunch of geometric shapes. Like that's one thing that I can see people doing that, or even a tool tie down or a lift ring or whatever other gewgaws and, doodads that you want to have on an armored vehicle, or a pitot tube or an antenna for a plane. Wrinkles and cloth, those kind of like natural types of things. And I suppose they might have found one in a museum and they just scanned it. And, there isn't any advanced arithmetic involved. It's just like, boom, we found one and we scanned it and we got it. But that's the thing they chose to do on that Vespid kit. And then of course the 4 and the Galaxy kits, it's tires. It's knobby tires for one of these, MRAP or JLTV type of vehicles. It's got the tread's very knobby, and then it's got lots of sidewall detail and all that stuff. And they look fantastic.
clearly, as far as parts, prints, and files, and whether you're printing yourself or buying the pre-made things, or even designing it yourself and printing it yourself, the stuff is prolific and it's all over the map as far as price and availability and the scope of the genres available and the scales, and certainly here to stay. But it's not all equal by any stretch of the imagination. I know I bought a few things that ended up being some pretty big regrets, and then some things I've been pretty darn impressed by. Steve, what's your experience been on the quality spectrum? I don't know what I would use for my baseline. I don't know if I would use current technology or your level of impressed you were when you got your very first thing. So maybe you can kind of talk about however you want to talk about it.
Well, one obvious comparison is to, at least this is my experience. One obvious comparison is to resin parts.
Yeah.
Because that's really, because before there was 3D printing, at least, so my big thing is science fiction, and then a lot of 1/72 armor, and other things come and go. I'll build anything eventually, but those are the things I'm super familiar with. And yeah, there've been resin conversion stuff for 1/72 armor, and in particular, my thing tends to be more towards post-war vehicles. So tires and wheels were always a big deal, and they would be available in resin. I would say generally the quality and the fidelity is actually better than resin. I think and this is hard to say if this is a quality thing or if this is my poor modeling skills thing. But I do feel like on a resin wheel or tire, you'd have some kind of giant pour stub to grind away and get rid of. I feel like that cleanup process with 3D printed parts is a little trickier because the material does, that whole quality I described earlier, that it's more granular, or it just doesn't behave the same. And I don't know if that's brittleness. I don't know what quality that is, but the example I'll give here is I just completed a little batch build of strikers, 1/72 strikers, and Trumpeter is giving us basically every variant of the striker that, at least they've announced every variant of the striker that has ever existed. And if you start looking at reference material on that, you see the wheels are all different. So you got to, the wheels are a big part of the appearance of that vehicle. So you want the wheels to be right. I used some 3D printed wheels from, I believe it's called Liang. I found, they had a bulge and a flat spot on the bottom of them. And what I found pretty quickly was it's really easy to make that flat spot even flatter and bigger than it's intended to be. So you got to really, really work carefully with it. And I never felt like I had a problem like that with resin. But it was an issue, with those Liang, but they're absolutely stunningly beautiful. I mean, it wasn't just like the writing on the sidewalls, but it's like the ribs. There's radial ribs, and then there's kind of concentric ribs.
Yeah.
And they look gorgeous. And then the tread looked absolutely right. And then that on a striker, the wheel's a lot more complex than you think. It's not just like a hub with bolts and a big bearing or something like that in the middle. There's a ring. And again, you got to look at your prototype photos to figure out what's going on, but there's a ring that goes around the hub, and that ring has a really funny purpose, or at least it's funny to me, because it has nothing to do with rolling the vehicle. It's a stirrup for the crew to get up on the vehicle. And if you injection mold that, it's just a ring that sticks out of the hub. But on this 3D print, it actually was hollow. Like it had like little arches inside of it. And I was blown away. That was a level of detail I could not believe. So detail good, care with the handling, the cleanup. I'm not ready to say that's higher quality or lower quality, because I think you got some trades going on there.
I think I would agree with that. And the issue is, I think with a lot of 3D printing is, like you said, with the traditional polyurethane, rubber molded cast parts. You had the big mold lug to deal with. Generally, often that wasn't too tricky. It's just a lot of work.
Mm-hmm.
And also you're dealing with a lot of organically made masters, scratch built masters by hand.
Right.
And all the idiosyncrasies that come with that. Sometimes the hubs of a wheel wouldn't be on center exactly, or wouldn't quite be round, or just all the nuances that come with scratch building something by hand. You kind of get around a lot of that with the CAD stuff. It's a lot more, sanitary. It's a lot more, the precision's a lot higher.
Right.
And you can get that usually right out off the printer. But still, I think what we've got going on, and Dave kind of mentioned the number of accessories out there, and I can't remember who we were talking to. It might have been a listener mail. I think Dave said something about that in one of the past episodes about how a lot of it seemed to be accessories, and somebody offered up that was probably an artifact of new CAD people getting into this. And that kind of stuff is not that hard to cut your teeth on, a lot of it.
Right.
And that's why we're seeing a lot of that stuff. Now, I think individual track links for 35th scale tanks a little bit different, but I think you can look at the quality spectrum, and folks want to know about the quality of 3D printed tracks. Please go to Panzermeister 36 YouTube channel and check out those videos. Because again, the quality and accuracy and ease of assembly, all that is just all over the map.
It is.
You have so many people of so many different skill levels doing it. And I think I was meant to make a point earlier, but didn't quite bring it home, is the lack of locating features on some of your 72nd scale parts kind of smacks of kits being designed by people who don't normally design kits.
Right.
They've got some CAD skill now and they're designing things, but some folks can think a little further down the road than others, and you can get a kit that's engineered better than others. I think I've seen a lot of that as well.
Well, and a comparable thing went on when resin hit the market many, many years ago. Mike, you remember AEF resin?
Yeah. I'd rather not.
Yeah, I was going to say, I hate to bring up bad memories. But again, that just goes to show you that when a new technology comes out, that there's a learning curve, B, there's a wide range of skill level among the people who are doing it. And you have Verlinden at one end and you have AEF at the other end. If you go and watch Evan's videos regarding those all those 3D printed tracks, it's absolutely apparent that you've got that same spread of skill level coming into this brand new technology.
And I guess you got to leave it to the internet to sort it out. I know.
I think that's the only way.
Yeah.
I know when it gets panned, and I bought several items from this company, FC Model Trends.
Yep.
And on our Facebook group, I made a little description of what I'd bought and what I thought of it, and then Evan started buying all those tool clamps from all these manufacturers, and kind of had the same experience I did. And then Evan and I are a lot alike, and as I was just about to chalk that up to us being too much alike, Matt McDougall had bought some wheels from FC Model Trends, and he's got a blog post, and the stinking supports on those things were so big that you really couldn't get them off the part.
Yes.
You sound like you've seen that one as well.
Yeah, I have. And it's one thing I think we might remember resin parts a little too fondly and wistfully.
Yeah.
Because you were talking about AEF designs. I remember the first resin thing I ever dealt with was a Verlinden M901 improved tow vehicle set. And when I think now about that, it's like what I was trying to do, the tools did not even exist. The different I mean, they probably existed. I just wasn't, I was in the Army in Germany. Like, where was I going to go find a deep razor saw or a jeweler saw or any of that kind of stuff? It was, I mean, that stuff was just not in the wide circulation that it's in today. And I still look back on it and think it's a miracle I even got the kit done. I mean, and that was like a good Verlinden one. And then the next thing after that was their V100, which, or M706, 2-axle armored car from Vietnam, which they molded with a single, like, solid hull.
Oh yeah. It was a block.
Oh, you could have thrown that at somebody and like split their forehead open with it.
Oh,
It was,
yeah.
I mean, that was a righteously solid chunk of resin. And I ended up using coat hanger wire, so you know how thick, heavy gauge coat hanger wire is, like axle stubs, because it needed, I mean, but I think back, it needed some oomph, but I think back on, some of those early things, and it's like, yeah, they were hitting and missing. They were, Verlinden was like, we might have thought it was like brilliant state of the art stuff at the time, but by today's standards, it's like, holy smoke. It was like chopped out of wood with an axe and then presented to us as like a cutting edge, new, innovative product that was a break from everything that Tamiya and Italieri was coming out with at the time. And we were happy for it. We just thought it was the greatest thing in the world. So, yeah, I suspect very strongly we're going to see like a strong learning curve, and not just with the materials and the engineering of these individual parts, like how they put them on, a little carrier sheet or, the little stub or whatever, and how they do the supports. But also the thing that you alluded to earlier, Mike, was like the weird pricing, like how much of these things really cost, and, what are they really worth? And, and ultimately they're worth what people will pay for them. But we're going to go through a period of, very expensive junk and then real bargains. Like, I can't believe I got this for $15. You have this head scratching moment. And then, I mean, I think now the thing that's different from that resin period of time and the vac form period of time is that, the manufacturing capability is in people's workbenches.
Yeah.
So it might just be that, like, wow, Mike Basquette or TJ Holler really figured out how to tilt and slice this one print to make it like awesome. And that's going to be the differentiator is who can do it better and who can work the machine better.
Well, Steve, that I think is a really great point. Resin casting was something that was kind of limited. Yeah, you could do it at home, but very few people did.
Right.
3D printing, you're going to have 1,000 flowers bloom as far as guys out there who have bought a machine and who either because of their profession know the CAD software, or they've decided to get into a second hobby and learn the CAD software. I suspect more than resin, you're going to have just an explosion of really, really quality stuff because you have so many more people producing it.
Mm-hmm.
So in the next couple of years, that may well be the difference that we see.
Well, I have a complaint to make about it. It's about printing, and it's actually about 2D printing for our hobby.
Okay.
And that is like, so we're making all these great advances with 3D printing, and it's pretty remarkable. I mean, when you think about the fact that, for less than $1,000, a modeler can have this like 3D printing capability on their workbench, which kind of puts it as, it's more expensive than an airbrush and a compressor, but it's not prohibitively crazy expensive, or, it's under $1,000. Why on earth can't we print any decal we want with a printer that we can hook up to our computer or that joins our iPhones off of, or our iOS devices off of Bluetooth. And that's like a thing in the marketplace that I am absolutely gobsmacked by. Like, why? I mean, we had Alps printers for a few years there, and that was a technology that came and went. They could print white. And yes, I print my own decals with an inkjet printer, and I have that. I'm fairly confident in that process, but I'm still so surprised that decal printing technology is still as rare and unusual as it is, and that, Furball is made by Cartograph and all that kind of stuff. It's like, really, there's one factory in Italy that can do this? Like, why? Like, we can make an object. We can scan one of our kids, and make a file and 3D print a scale model of one of our own children, but we can't print a decal. Like, that seems wrong.
Well, I agree with you, and I would love that, and I fully support it. I do think that at least in that direction, although it's not what we want, but in that direction are all of these cameos and silhouettes and all of the mask cutters, which give you the ability to produce the masks, to produce the markings. But yeah, yes. I'm down with you. I would love a box that I could sit on my desk and print decal sheets all day, because you may not have heard,
because God knows you need some more.
I was going to say, I'm a decalholic, so the thing I need more is an ability to print as many decal sheets as I want. But if you're going to do the startup, I will back that startup to produce that magic box.
Well, that's kind of a segue of sorts into what I want to touch on last, as far as our kind of discussion on the current 3D printed parts and files market. Is kind of the state of the union, I guess, if you will. We've come out of a past where this was kind of a niche and very limited thing. We had the FDM printers you mentioned in your model railroading early, and a lot of this DLP and laser-based resin printing owes its roots to the stereolithography industry that's been out there since the 80s, really. The technology is not so new, but the compactness and the affordability are what's driving the current market, really. Presently, we've talked about, we've got accessory parts, we've got full kits, we've got files, you can print your own full kit. We've got the inclusion of 3D printed parts in mainstream plastic model kits. Where do you think this is going?
I think figures are an area that are absolutely ripe. And from what I understand, there's two pieces of that. One of them is not just the 3D printing, and again, being able to manufacture and form things that you could never make in an injection mold, but it's the whole business of being able to go right from a scan, a LiDAR or whatever it is they're using in these, like three to, they go 360 degrees around an object or around a person. And I understand, for example, Tamiya's figures in their maybe the last 3, 4, or 5 years worth of kits actually have, scanned facial features and stuff. And I think the inside joke is that it's a couple of Tamiya employees whose faces keep showing up in the kits or something. I think I heard that on the Posse or possibly on Model Geeks or something like that. But I think the figures seems to me like there's some real interesting possibilities there, because where that used to be completely dependent on an analog sculpt, a real life sculpt, and then a master being formed from it. I think that's an opportunity to put, particularly in larger scales, like, since 1/16, for example, is really catching on, like really getting Brad Pitt's face on a figure of War Daddy so that you can make your Fury, or you can get your Autocarius or your Michael Caine on the top of a Humber Scout car or something like that. I mean, there's some really awesome opportunities there. The thing my imagination runs to immediately is something where the poses of figures are infinitely variable at the 3D at the digital models level, and then you can print it. And everybody says that, I make a couple observations about figures that surface either as figures or they come in kits. Is one, they're always in very erect poses, and there's people are always kind of making fun of how they're pointing at something or something like that. So the opportunity to make even more casual poses without like being a Shep Payne or Bill Horan level figure sculptor, I think that seems like it might be an exciting possibility. And then to get like realistic faces onto figures and that sort of thing, those all seem like they might be the next things that we see. And the fact that you can take it right from a scan, like it isn't about, how do you figure out the advanced arithmetic of a wrinkle in a pair of fatigue pants that a paratrooper was wearing in 1944, or a Red Army soldier with a quilted jacket or pants or whatever. I mean, you would. I mean, all you have to do is find some photos, or even just get a live human model to scan all that stuff. So that's like a thing that I would really like to see, and I fully expect there's some of that already. By the way, I should note that in small scale figures, like for 1/72 and smaller, and also the model railroaders, they're already using some of this stuff, of scanned figures. A friend of mine, Trevor Martin, who models in S scale, which is 1/64th, and he models also in O scale, which is 1/48th. He's gotten some of these 3D printed figures. I think they're from something called Model U, and they're like slouching. They're like completely natural poses, and he's a pretty good figure painter, and the life that it adds to his train models is unbelievable. Like these, the engineer like really hanging out of the cab, not just like in the cab, standing like a soldier, but like he's got his elbow out the window and maybe he's even got a cigarette or something. And, it looks really natural. And I think that's a area that we might see some real advance in.
Well, Steve Hustad always complains about 72nd scale figures, and he swears by the Preezer figures and all. I suspect that 3D printing is going to give us a whole bunch of 72nd scale figures that approximate what he does with the Preezer figures.
Yeah, check out Germania figures. Germania Figuren, or Germania Figuren. They have 1/72nd. I think they run them in HO 1/87th as well.
Yeah,
but they have like Vietnam and all kinds of stuff like that. I have a few of them. I haven't painted them and stuck them in any of my Bundeswehr vehicles yet, but I fully intend to, and they look fantastic. They're very crisp. They seem, natural poses and that sort of thing. But I'm imagining, in 1/35th, this could be a real, and in 1/16th, this could be a real sort of leap forward for the quality of figures.
Gotcha.
Well, I think for my engineering background, I keep wondering what the limit's going to be, and maybe there's not one, but just when you think things can't get any better, they always do. So it's hard for me to put a stake in the ground as to where this is going. At some point, you hit a material limitation that the stuff's just not going to be very durable because it's so fine. I think there's probably a fidelity of scale versus durability threshold at some point. That's my speculation. But I think as far as what we're going to see, especially for the print yourself, the file share stuff or the file sell stuff, the esoteric gets a lot more practical at that point. In injection molded, you got amusing hobby out there making some pretty crazy paper panzers and World of Tanks kind of oddball stuff. But this kit I bought from Faustus is a paper panzer of sorts. And would somebody kit it? In the golden age of modeling, maybe they would, but I think that you're just going to see more of that kind of thing, more of these oddball subjects. And I just think that the detail is going to get better and better until it's so small you can't hold it anymore. It's just going to break.
Right. Well, I think a signal of like when we will know that 3D printing has really arrived is when a Tamiya kit comes to us with some critical piece 3D printed, some canvas mantlet cover or some other impossible goofy part that has never really been worked appropriately in injection molding and is impossible. Maybe it's even a figure. I don't know. But that to me would be the moment where I think that we'd be signaled like, yep, it's arrived and it's not just legit, but it's recognized as a material that could be, that stands shoulder to shoulder and complements the injection molded plastic, which kind of leads me to a conclusion. And again, Mike, I know that you've been involved with injection molding things, and I hear, again, not really. I'm roughly familiar with how 3D printing works. I mean, I know what the machines look like. I know the principles behind it, but I hear people say like, yeah, I wait for it to come out overnight. Like, okay. So what would Tamiya-san or Hasegawa-san think about that? It's like, well, they're there to make kits, I don't know, 1,000, 10,000, 5,000 at a throw. They can't afford to, and even if you sped 3D printing up, I think there'll always be a place for injection molding, just because the cycle time, if you will, or the throughput in an injection molding machine is I think always going to have an advantage over 3D printing, which is going to take, even if it took minutes, to make this thing that you needed out of 3D printing or even a whole kit. That's a lot less time than I'm pretty sure that Flyhawk or S Model or Revell puts into a 1/72nd, latest model of the Leopard or a Martyr, modern Bundeswehr vehicles, which by the way, like I have, probably a half dozen different unbuilt Bundeswehr and, different Western European NATO armies vehicles that have never been made in injection molded. That's what I have. But I think injection molding is always going to have that advantage of like scale. Like we can make a zillion of them for nothing once we cut the tooling.
All right. Well, that's kind of the state of the 3D print world from the consumer side. I know Dave wants to change gears here a minute and talk about something else. Dave, I'll let you roll with that one.
Just very briefly, because we've gone way over. You had a post where you noted these $30 or $40 airbrushes coming, I guess, mostly out of China, and which raised the question that are these, while we all admit they're not Harder and Steenbeck, they're not Badger, they're not Iwata, they are, at least seem to be, good quality basic airbrushes. And will this prompt people who get into modeling to get into airbrushing earlier, and whether or not that will have a salutary effect on the hobby as a whole? 30 seconds, go.
Yeah, I think people will buy them and use them and then figure out that, that the Harder and Steenbeck or the Badger or the Iwata or the GSI Krios item is better. But I've had one of these. I just bought it on a whim to see what it was like. I'm going to say it's lower quality, but it does work.
Right.
And you will learn the fundamentals and the basics. And at $30, it's, hesitate to say this because it just seems so wasteful, but it is almost disposable.
Exactly. And not only that, but if you're doing armor, where you're doing U.S. armor, World War II, where you're doing olive drab, it's a spray gun.
Yeah.
And that's a great introduction for somebody just coming into the hobby.
That's right. That's right. The Achilles heel I see on them. I mean, and again, this doesn't interfere with the idea that somebody will get one and use it till they break it for a year, use it for a year until they break it or something like that. The group of modelers that I hang out with here in Delaware includes a gentleman who is kind of famous around, not at nationals because I'm about to describe the job he has. He can't ever come to nationals, but everybody who comes to MarauderCon and to the show in Richmond and this recent PAX-Con, everybody knows him because he always kills in the competition. He builds wonderful models of everything, not just aircraft, not just armor, not just science fiction. He does all kinds of nutty stuff, and he's really good. But his day job, as it were, is he's the airbrush guy on the boardwalk down in Ocean City, Maryland, which is why he can't come to nationals. He works for, 4 or 5 months a year, and then he builds models the other part of the year. But the thing about Mike is nobody knows more about airbrushing than him because he makes his living with one. And he, by the way, is an Iwata guy through and through. And here's what he says about Iwata is not necessarily that it's like better than Harder and Steenbeck or anything like that. He says, I can get the parts anywhere. Like they're at Michael's, they're in craft stores. I can get it shipped to me overnight when I need it because I'm making my living off of these things. He usually keeps a stock of all of it around. And that was his input about the $30 airbrush was, can you get parts for it? Can you get O-rings and seals and, needles and all that other stuff? And if you can't, that's what's ultimately going to be disappointing. So I think that's kind of the Achilles heel of these things. I don't get the sense that they have a good parts pipeline. I
actually saw a presentation by him at a nationals in Virginia Beach.
Yeah, he's a great guy. Yeah. And he is also one of these guys who will tell you anything. Like you want to know how to do a thing, he will bend your ear, for 20 or 30 minutes telling you exactly how to do it.
I do think that those available cheap, good but not great airbrushes are going to make an impact on the hobby, and I'll be not as much of an impact as 3D printing, but I'll be interested to see where it is 2 years from now.
Yeah, and I suspect the brands will change, and there will be, there will always be some kind of like basically down market airbrush that you can order direct off of Amazon or eBay or something like that. And they'll be with us. And again, they'll be frustrating to people at some point, but long before they're frustrating, people are going to like learn the essentials of using an airbrush. And that will ultimately be a good thing.
Yeah, I agree.
All right. Well, Steve, thanks for joining us tonight. It's been a good conversation.
We talked your ear off.
Well, I talked your ears off, and I appreciate you going long for all of my favorite things to talk about.
Well, good. So why don't you plug your blog one more time before we let you go?
Yep. So the blog is called Sprue Pie with Frets, and it can be found at spruepiewithfrets.wordpress.com. If you just Google Sprue Pie with Frets, it will undoubtedly come up. I also have a presence on Facebook. Again, just put Sprue Pie with Frets in the search bar, and I will likely turn up there as well.
All right. Well, thanks again.
Thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate I appreciate you plugging me every week. I really, really appreciate that. And I appreciate the great dialogue that we've been able to have over the years. You even kind of led me to start writing the blog in the first place. I don't know if you realize that, but I really appreciate it. I value this relationship a lot. And I consider you guys great modeling friends. So thank you very much.
Well, that's what it's all about, man. Appreciate that very much.
And looking forward to seeing you at Madison.
I'm looking forward to being there.
Well, that was a fun conversation. There's a
Yes.
lot of stuff out there. Some of it's great, some of it's junk, but it's like, yeah, like you said before we kicked it off, drinking from a fire hose. It's like there's so much stuff out there.
Well, and not only that, but talking to Steve, he thinks deeply about some of this stuff, and that's kind of nice, because if you take the time to think beyond the surface, it really does provide another perspective on what's going on out there. And I think he really is looking at this stuff and thinking not just, hey, what's come out and what's coming out, but where has it come from, and that leads to where is it going to.
Well, Dave, it's time for the Benchtop Halftime Report. I know we've
Yep.
both been doing pretty well. Now, we had the little last episode where we were logging our hours, trying to make sure we got to the bench X number of hours.
Yeah.
I continued that for the week ahead of Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
And
Me too.
I think I tried to allot myself 10 hours that week. And
Yeah.
I got 8, which wasn't bad. And I didn't do it over the holiday week just because.
Yeah. No,
But this week's off to a good start. I put it in a bunch of times Sunday. So
yes, you did.
Probably 6 hours.
Yep.
So we're being productive. What's your progress looked like, man?
Well, same as you. The week following our little experiment, I kept track, and I got about 6.5 hours in, which was down from the week before, but respectable, especially given that was a week that we were recording. So that takes up a little bit of time that would otherwise be used for modeling. And like you, I kind of took, well, not time off, but didn't get as much done during the holiday, the extended holiday week, just simply because family and friends and eating and football and all of that. I'm off to a good start as well. I've gotten the LCM3. It's been primed, fixed any flaws, reprimed, and it is now fully in the paint shop. The F8 fuselage has been glossed, so it is fully in the decal shop, which means that I can tentatively, well, I'm not really going to dive into starting a new construction project completely. I am doing some tentative first steps on what will be my first project of 2024. I've made a tentative list of the 5 things that I want to get done in 2024. And I've gotten a kind of a pre-start on one of them, just doing some of the early stuff, not fully committing to building it. It feels good. I'm seeing progress. You know, there's a lot of times you sit down at the bench and you spend a couple hours and you look down and it doesn't look like you've progressed from where you started when you sat down at the bench.
Yep.
This is not one of those times. I can see clear progress on everything I'm touching. So I'm hoping that I can stave off the dark time, that while there's, I'm having to get the Christmas decorations out of the attic and put the Christmas decorations up outside and do all those other things that take away time from what I'd like to be doing. I'm hoping that I can continue between now to New Year's Eve, get to the bench regularly and wrap some projects up here by the end of the year. What's your bench look like?
It's been pretty busy. I've had to have critical mass cleanup a couple times, especially on those long sessions.
Yeah.
After about 5 hours, I got a pretty big mess on the bench.
Yep.
Especially if it's been a continuous 5 hours.
Yep.
Well, not all the work's been on the bench though. The E16 Paul is in the paint booth. The pre-shading I'm doing is about 50% complete. I've just about got all the top side and fuselage done.
Yeah.
So I got to flip her over and do the floats and the undersides of the wings.
Yep.
It's going pretty well. I've had a few minor gaffes. I've gotten some spider webbing from getting too close, or the paint too thin, all the stuff
Sure.
John talks about in his fine lines conversations we've had.
Yeah.
But all in all, it's going pretty well.
It all sands out, man. Let it dry. You can sand anything out.
Just about. That's true. Looking forward to getting that one done. Now, one thing I've got to do is the decal sheet is out of register. Not bad, but bad enough that I'm probably not going to use the float stripes.
Yep.
So I'm going to order some trim film, microscale, some white and some red,
right,
to work those up myself. Probably once I get to decal phase.
Yeah.
Other than that, once I get all the pre-shading done, I'll set the canopy, make sure that's all where I want it, and then I guess I'll get to start painting the real colors at that point.
That's where the fun begins, man.
I hope so.
Oh, it is.
I hope so.
Trust me.
Well, here's a question for you.
Yep.
The Hinamaru's on the sides of the fuselage.
Yes.
Typically, the underside color scoops up high on that section of the fuselage.
Right.
Should I give margin for the entire Hinamaru? Do you think the green would show through if I cut it short? What would you do? You get what I'm saying?
Yeah. At this point, I'll tell you what I would do. I mean, I've gotten to the point where I'm probably never going to use a decal Hinamaru ever again in my life.
Well, there's already too much new stuff on this one. I'm not going to mask. I'm not going to mask the markings. That's asking for it, man.
Okay.
But I could mask.
You could mask,
for the insignia,
circle,
yeah.
Right. Put a circle down for the insignia just so that you basically paint around it, peel off the mask, and put the decal down where the mask was.
Yeah, I think that's what I'm going to do.
Yep.
That was my idea. So that was my solution. So I think, I'm afraid the opacity of the markings won't be so much that.
That is the single biggest problem with most Hinamaru decals, is that they are not as opaque as you need them to be.
Yeah. Then you could just put the demarcation anywhere you wanted it.
Right. Exactly.
And cover it up. So,
yeah.
All right. That's good. The KV-85.
Major progress here.
Yeah, and the dragon I was referring to earlier during the listener mail segment was executing my long planned solution to address all the engine and transmission deck issues. Basically, on the Bronco kit, which I'm using, I've questioned the wisdom of using that as the base ever since I started, but it's just trade offs versus the trumpeter offering.
Sure,
but anyway, the problem is it looks like Bronco used a monument tank as photo reference, which a monument tank would have all these plates welded down so scrappers couldn't sneak out there at midnight and haul them off, right?
Yeah.
In reality, they're supposed to be, on the kit, there's weld seams where there shouldn't be. And some of them are running right through a really complex bolt and fastener array. So as I looked at this kit, I'm like, well, how am I going to fix this? Well, the solution of sorts is in the box, because Bronco gives you some sprues that were from their first released SU-152 kit, the assault gun built on the KV chassis. And in that is the engine and transmission deck for that kit, the SU-152. So what I've done, there's some transverse weld seams on this thing that run right across the width of the vehicle that shouldn't be there. There should be a gap between two plates there instead. And it's just, there's no room to put a straight edge down to scribe it because of all the bolt detail. So what I've done is I've cut the transmission plate from that extra part in the kit just forward of this offending weld line. And then I sanded it back carefully just through that weld line. And then on the kit part for the KV-85, I cut the transmission deck off of that one just after that same weld line on the other part, and then sanded it back toward the front of the vehicle just past that weld line. So now the weld line's gone, and now I've got to join these up, and there'll be a gap there, which will be the gap that's supposed to be there.
Gotcha.
It's a lot of delicate cutting, a lot of delicate scribing. And I tell you, it's amazing what the right tools will do for you. And if you don't have a JLC razor saw in your bag of tricks,
Yep.
you probably ought to get one.
Yep.
And then I've made a lot of use of the UMM scriber.
Yep.
One, the first one, 01 or 001, whatever the number is.
Yeah. 001.
I've been using the crap out of that one to get the groove started, to get a kerf deep enough that the razor saw won't jump out of it as I'm sawing.
Right.
And I've gone painfully slow, really metered effort, taking my time, making sure the saw didn't jump out of the kerf and scratch crap up, because it's just going to be really hard to fix if you do, because there's so much detail in the way. And then in addition to that, there's weld seams that run along the center line, front to back, along both those places that shouldn't be there either. And basically, I'm not going to get into all of that tonight in this session of the Benchtop Halftime Report, but a lot of cutting, a lot of sanding. I got all the difficult cuts made. Everything's still square. I'm using a machinist square as I'm sanding this thing to make sure I don't get the thing, get the corner inside or outside of 90 degrees. Because if I butt the two things together and one of them's not 90 degrees, the gap's going to be wider on one side than the other, and it's going to look terrible.
Well, except that I would bet that on a real Russian tank, the gap may be bigger on one side than the other, the way they were.
Probably not visible in 35th scale. But,
well, probably not. Yes.
So the hard part is mostly done, and I got to get back to the Paul this week. So I'm probably going to stop on the KV85 for a while, because I got 6 hours in Sunday,
right,
and let that rest a little while and get back to airbrushing. And it's kind of nice having one paint and one in build. I'm
telling you, that is the way to go. That is the way to go. I will say that you failed to mention one other right tool that you should have for what you were doing.
Which was?
The Goodman sanding blocks.
Yeah, I've used the heck out of the Goodman sanding blocks too. I highly recommend those.
Yes.
If you can source your acrylic, it's something you could probably make yourself if you wanted to, but you don't have to, because those blocks are available, and they're. I'm surprised at the life I'm getting out of them.
I've got both.
I've got a couple that are starting to show some edge loss in the grit.
Yeah,
but I've been using them for 3 years now. Almost.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So,
I am surprised at how useful they are, how often I go to them, and how durable they've been.
So highly recommended. The UMM scribers, JLC razor saws, and the Goodman sanding blocks.
Yep. Absolutely.
Will cure what ails you.
There you go. Well, and some modeling fluid. Mike, have you been spending any money on your hobby lately?
I've spent a little bit, Dave, but
not as much as I have.
We'll get to you in a minute. You asked me first, but
I know.
Before I get going, man, did you see that story about that guy? Where was it? Facebook or somewhere? That shop in Athens, they're having trouble. They're having to change their store hours to later in the day because they can't find anybody to work in the mornings.
No.
Yeah, apparently Dawn's tough on grease.
Oh, God. Oh, man. I cannot believe I fell for that.
I had to see if I could get you twice, man. This could be a recurring thing. Really crappy jokes.
I could tell. What's happening is your children at work are objecting to you doing this all the time. So now you're bringing it here.
Well, on a serious note, Dave, I have bought a few things. You bought one of them for me.
Okay. Well, yeah, I bought one at your request.
Yeah, somebody was having a sale. Was it Sprue Brothers?
Sprue Brothers.
Yeah, they were running their special on their Arma hobby stuff week before Thanksgiving, I think. And I picked up that P39Q.
Yep. From
their sale. That's the one Arma one that was really interesting to me. I used to hate that plane as a kid growing up.
Yep.
Because there was the monogram 48 scale, and the thing's just so unorthodox compared to the other fighters, its contemporaries, with the mid-engine and all that, and the tricycle landing gear. But I saw it was a Russian film about a P-39 squadron.
Oh yeah, they used the crap out of them, and they loved them.
Well, it's because all most of their air combat was low altitudes, where the plane could actually actually perform.
Yep.
And I'll probably going to pick up a Soviet aircraft decal sheet for it, but
you might know somebody who has several already.
Yeah, you might. It's all probably stash fodder, but I've got one now. It's a nice kit. I opened it up.
Yep. Oh, the Arma kits are beautiful. I'm telling you.
Also picked up some Eureka tow cables for my KV-85 because the wire ones in the kit are really not very good. What else? Some miscellaneous consumables, some Mr. Surfacer 1500 and some paint I've picked up. Not too exciting there. That's about it, really. I made out of scale reproductions a week ago unscathed. Get some nice stuff in there, though, man.
Yeah, that shop is well stocked right now.
Yeah, if you're ever in the Louisville metro area, you need to swing by Brian's and check out Scale Reproductions. You'll come out there with something most of the time. I managed to not this time, but usually doesn't happen that way.
No.
And there's some things I've been thinking about pulling the trigger on, but I've been holding the line so far.
Well, good for you. I'm glad one of us has showed restraint.
Well, you sure haven't. Lay it on us.
No, I have not. Gee, where to begin? Well, I guess the big item was that I purchased off of eBay the Takom 72nd scale Akagi deck, which when I purchased it, they said delivery will be sometime between January and February of 2024. And I thought, I'm in no rush, so I ordered it. 2 weeks later, it's on my doorstep. A couple of things. It's impressive. It is also, I'm very surprised at the price point for this kit, given the amount of stuff in the kit. Just the physical amount of plastic and number of sprues and photo etch and decals, etc. So that was my big purchase. In addition, I purchased a couple of other model kits, a Revell JU88A1 Battle Britain version, a Revell 72nd scale Flak 3637, because I want to do a German 88 flak gun. It's part of a project that I've got coming up for 2024, so I bought that. I went to Brian's and I got some Mr. Surfacer Mahogany That 1000, a bottle of Tamiya Extra Thin Cement, the ammo book on the MiG-17, which, I've got a lot of MiG-17 reference, so it's possible I could have done without it, but it was on his Black Friday sale. It's a good book with a lot of really good detailed pictures. So I went ahead and pulled the trigger. And then finally, I've purchased but not yet received a Japanese book on the A7M, which was the follow-on to the Zero, of which only 8 or 9 were produced at the end of the war. And I found a book, but was having trouble finding the book itself. And Michael Karnaka and Dr. Dave Geldmacher were both able to locate copies for me. I ordered a copy, and it should be here sometime soon. So yeah, I've been breaking the wallet. So I'm afraid between now and the end of the year, I'm on moratorium, self-imposed moratorium.
Well, we'll see if you survive.
Yeah, well, my creditors insist that I impose a moratorium at this point. We've reached the end of the episode. The modeling fluid, at least on my side, is empty. How's your modeling fluid?
Well, mine's empty too, and this is like my third pour out of that half a bottle, I guess. So it's gone.
Good. What did you think of it?
It's really good. It's a really balanced kind of bourbon.
It is very balanced, very smooth.
It's good.
Yeah.
It's not cheap.
No, it is not.
So thanks for that, Derek. Appreciate it. Thanks for being a listener, and we appreciate you thinking of us when you know you're going to see us. That was very good.
Yes, Patreon Plus.
That's right.
It's
Patreon Plus. What about your beer there?
Well, I'm done with it. I drank it. Yeah, it's really peach forward. if you like peach, I can see how you'd enjoy this. Since peach is not my favorite flavor, it definitely isn't a fall or winter drink. It would definitely be a out by the pool summer thing. I'll be honest, I much prefer, say, a lemon shandy or something like that as opposed to the peach flavored Leinenkugels, but it wasn't awful. It got me through the episode. Would I go out of my way to buy one again? No, but we experiment. It was no peanut butter whiskey, so it worked.
But you're not going to be moving to the country and eating a lot of peaches.
No, I'm not. Mike, to wrap up the episode, do you have anyone or anything or whatever that you want to shout out?
I've got two. The big one is I'd like to thank the latest folks who've offered their generosity to support our efforts here at Plastic Model Mojo. Those since last time we've done this would be Mr. Eric Kinser, Joe Paisano, Mark Grant, Tim Bangirter, and Colin Francis, and Brandon Jacob. Those gentlemen have chosen to offer their generosity to support what we got going on here, Dave, and it's greatly appreciated, guys. Thanks a lot.
It is, absolutely. I want to add my thanks to it because, again, I'm not sure we could keep doing what we're doing were it not for the people who are doing that.
If you'd like to join the ranks of these fine gentlemen, you can do so through several avenues for this type of thing. The one we just fixed is Patreon. If you'd like to make a recurring contribution, you can do that now by going to www.patreon.com/join/Plastic Model Mojo. If you'd like to make a one-time donation or manage your own recurring contribution, you can do that through PayPal. And to get to PayPal, you can go to www.plasticmodelmojo.com. That's our homepage. And in the upper right-hand corner, there's a heart icon. And you can follow that link straight to PayPal and do what you want to do there. And new today, in fact, is Buy Me a Coffee. It's another avenue you could take to make a one-time contribution. You could buy us a coffee. I think I got it called Buy Us a Beer on there, though.
There you go.
Buymeacoffee.com/Mojovians. MOJOVIANS. Buymeacoffee.com/Mojovians. And that one's pretty easy to follow once you get there. So that's my first shout out, Dave, is the new contributors, our new Patreon and PayPal supporters. And make sure folks listening, if they care to do something like that, they've got the means to do it. And just to finally, again, just thanks so much, folks. It's really humbling to realize the amount of support we get from you all.
Yes, absolutely. I'd like to add my thanks as well. My shout out this month is to Jason Hanscom, who I mentioned earlier from the DMs. I'm shouting him out on behalf of all of the listeners who reach out just to tell us that they enjoy the show, they enjoy listening, that we're doing something to help them keep their mojo alive. Like I said, in the middle of my workday, I'll get a DM on my phone and it'll just be a listener telling us that, and that just makes my day. It really does make my day. It makes whatever else is going on. And when I'm working, there's a lot of times that my work is not the most pleasant thing in the world. The practice of law can be telling people what they don't want to hear a lot, and a lot of times they're not happy about it. So it's kind of nice to have listeners texting, DMing, emailing, saying, hey, I listen, you help me get through my modeling ups and downs, and I appreciate what you're doing. So, Jason, on behalf of all of the listeners, thank you.
Well, my last one is Eric Choi of AMPS and all those who contributed to the September-October issue of AMPS Boresight.
Yes.
It's their 30th anniversary issue. It was a really enjoyable recap of the Society's 30-year history from several different angles.
Yep.
I really had fun reading it today. It's really well done. Congrats on 30 years to the Society. It's making me want to get back into the fold as more than just an armchair member as I am now. We got to get back to that show.
Yes.
and participate in that some more. And as a kind of a joke, I thank you guys for not resurrecting the myth from the old web forum days that the Military Modelers Club of Louisville was somehow culpable in the debacle that was the 1992 Association of Military Modelers Conventions held in Louisville, Kentucky.
Yes.
Oh, somehow we got pinned with that, and we hadn't.
It took a while to live it down.
Took a while to live it down. I will say, though, just describing the situation that was that show as unfortunate circumstances is an epic understatement.
Yes, absolutely.
But that's all ancient history, and it's good on you to stick to the high road and not get into the minutia of what all went down. It's an interesting story. But that's all kind of tongue-in-cheek stuff. I really enjoyed the issue. It's pretty amazing. 30 years. That's hard to believe because I was right there.
Yep.
Issue 1, and I kind of let my membership lapse for a number of years, but got back in here since we started the podcast, and look forward to making that show.
Absolutely. The dojo at AMPS is going to be off the hook.
Well, that's it, man. Unless you got something else.
That's it. Let's wrap this one up.
Well, as we always say, Dave.
So many kids.
So little time. We'll catch you next time.